We have tonight an amazing guest that I'm personally very excited to talk with. He has started CSETI and the Disclosure Project, and has really done some amazing work toward bringing illumination to the public about ETs visiting, about communication with other realities, other beings. And I'm just going to let him and I talk about this as we go, because there is so much that he's doing. It's just absolutely mind-boggling. He has a new book out. It's called Hidden Truth, Forbidden Knowledge. Stephen M. Greer, welcome. I'm so glad you're on today.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
I got to tell you, I have a lot of personal interest in this subject. It's very exciting to me, and as I was looking through all of your websites and reading your book and seeing the scope, I was aware of the Disclosure Project, and I knew about CSETI, but I hadn't put all the pieces together. You've really accomplished a lot.
It's been a lot of work. Yeah, it's a lot of work, and you add to that the fact that I'm an emergency and trauma medical doctor that ran a busy emergency department for 10 years. It's been a full life.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, what made you shift into this? I mean, this is a forbidden subject, so to speak. It's one that's vehemently denied in many corners, and yet we know it exists. But you had personal experiences. You kind of worked into this, didn't you?
Yes, I think people you often have asked, how did a physician become the guy that ends up briefing a sitting CIA director on this issue of that we're being visited by intelligent civilizations from elsewhere. And it's a bit of a story. In this book you refer to, Hidden Truth, Forbidden Knowledge, is a personal memoir of my journey and how I arrived here. And at disclosureproject.org, Disclosure Project, all one word, and .org, because we're a nonprofit, people can read about that. And I got involved because when I was quite young, when I was 8 or 9 years of age, around the time that my maternal uncle was designing the lunar module that took Neil Armstrong to the moon, landed on the moon the first time. That was my uncle was the senior project engineer for that at Grumman. I had a sighting of one of these unusual objects. It was a seamless silver sort of disc-shaped object in broad daylight, and I was a young boy and with some friends in my neighborhood, and I knew I had seen something from another world, and it quite affected me. I became quite interested in everything having to do with visitors from elsewhere, and looked into it very in-depth, even though I was a little boy. And later, as I became a teenager, I sort of lost interest in all that. But then when I was 17, got very sick. I had an injury to my left leg and had a near-death experience. And in the context of this, or the course of this near-death experience, even though I was raised in a very atheist, agnostic sort of family that I always joke they were very devout atheists. I had an experience where I went into a state of cosmic consciousness and went into space and had an experience of a unity consciousness in space. And
you actually experienced basically emergence, didn't you, out there?
No. The proper term for it is the experiencing of the nature of the mind as the universal resonance that is the universal mind, the universal being.
Right.
So that's the proper. I mean, I use.
Okay.
Okay. So that was the experience, and it was the state of perfect oneness and unity. And subsequently, I did survive, of course, that near-death experience. But it really taught me that the nature of the conscious mind within us is this unbounded field of being. And so I began to study meditation and things of this sort, and eventually became a meditation teacher. But in the course of this, one day I was up on a mountain in North Carolina where I'd gone off to college that following fall. And at least this story is in the book, Hidden Truth, Forbidden Knowledge. And I was sitting up there, and it was around sunset. I was up over 5,000 feet, and it was in October of 1973, and I was looking out over the mountains, and here this same spacecraft appears again. And this time I have this sort of conscious connection with the occupants of it. And I see it and acknowledge it, and then it just vanishes. It just winks out and dematerializes. And I sit on the top of this mountain, Rich's Mountain there outside Boone, North Carolina, and began to meditate, because I went up there to meditate at sunset on top of the mountain. And I had this very deep meditation. And afterwards, it had gotten dark, and I stood up and I looked at the stars. It was crystal clear air, and it was as if a thought not quite my own said, "Behold what a beautiful universe God has made." And with that, I went back into this state of cosmic mind while I was in my body standing there. And it was beautiful. And then I realized that next to me was this being, and there was an extraterrestrial creature just to my right, and much shorter than I was, and he touched my right shoulder very firmly. And with that, I sort of instantly appeared on the inside of this spacecraft. And it was then that these visitors and I co-created a technique that I now teach people to be able to contact these beings through the use of consciousness, higher states of consciousness, and what I call coherent thought. It's like a laser is a coherent light, but you can achieve coherent thought from this very, very deep state of universal mind, and that instantly can attach, if you will, to the communication systems that these extraterrestrial visitors use. And this kind of blows people's minds when they hear about this, but I say, look, we're dealing with civilizations whose technologies seamlessly interface with clear directed thought and consciousness, their guidance systems, communication systems. And people say, well, is it telepathy? I said, no, it's a high-tech version of that. So we co-created this technique, and I call it the Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind initiative now, where we've trained people to go out all over the world and enter into this state of consciousness and then be able to remote view the spacecraft and then vector them into a site using consciousness and thought. And
so you're basically...
at the time I didn't think, I said, well, this can't possibly work. So I started experimenting with it on my own. And every time I did, there would be an ET craft that would show up.
Absolutely.
And we had some amazing encounters, and I share these in this book. And that's how eventually I came around to deciding I needed to form an organization called the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence. And
CSETI.
CSETI, CSETI.org. And formalize a project of peaceful contact with these visitors within the paradigm of universal consciousness and universal peace.
Let's talk about that a little bit. When you get into a state of universal consciousness, don't you find that consciousness is superluminal, in other words, faster than the speed of light? You're really not working in a direct sense, but more of a pure sense.
Well, in fact, any civilization that travels through interstellar space has had to come to understand these profound sciences in consciousness. And I predict that the next 1,000 years, the big growth will be sciences that deal with exactly this area. It's already going on in certain circles.
Yeah.
But I think that humans have always had the ability to experience this aspect of themselves that's universal and this unbounded self. But there are specific applications to it that begin to be experienced. And when you're dealing with civilizations that routinely go through this crossing point of light, as I call it, the resonance frequency of the field of light, you're dealing with civilizations that are very familiar with what used to be brushed off as the etheric or the astral and thought worlds that are non-linear and non-local, but extremely real. And if you want to visualize it, when an extraterrestrial spacecraft shifts beyond the material linear space-time frequency of matter, they shift in a quantum moment instantly into a field of energy that is very akin to what you experience in a lucid dream state.
I've actually seen that. It's phenomenal to watch that. I got pictures of them coming and going, and it was stunning.
Right, we do also, and I think people have to understand that, well, they say, well, then are these beings actually extraterrestrial or are they something else? I said, well, no, they're actually extraterrestrial, but they're so advanced in terms of their technologies that they're dealing with resonance fields of energy that usually get relegated to the world of the mystic. Now, interestingly, what best prepared me for doing the work I'm doing now is that I decided I wanted to become a Vedic scholar, and I actually became a meditation teacher and a student of Vedanta and the Vedas, and actually do pujas and teach people meditation techniques. And I did this before I went into medicine. And I found that by doing that very deeply and experiencing that knowledge very deeply, I was able to really understand and unravel the mysteries of the extraterrestrial visitations that people have, where on the one hand it can be very physical and technological, on the other hand there seems to be this interface with consciousness and thought, and for many people even in the lucid dream state. And you have to ask, where is that connection? Well, the nexus where all this meets is the state of this deep silent state of consciousness, because mind is always omnipresent, and it's always unbounded by space or time. And it is through that understanding that you can begin to appreciate how communication across interstellar distances take place, travel through interstellar distances, and how technologies eventually evolve so where things emerge from that realm into the physical and not the other way around.
Sure. So we're literally talking about multidimensional reality. You're following frequencies. You're following dimensional realities into the wholeness of consciousness.
Right.
Yeah.
And I tend not to use the word dimensions because it makes it sound like it's separate.
It's
a more
not.
accurate words. You're trying to use with words something you really is very difficult and it's abstract. But I tell people, think of a quantum hologram. If you take a hologram of Marilyn Monroe, and if you took a little part of her dress, you'd get the whole image of Marilyn Monroe in just that part. And so what you need to think of is that the whole universe is a quantum hologram that is conscious, and every point in space and time is connected to every other point in space and time instantly through this non-local field of awareness and mind. And Erwin Schrödinger, who was the father of modern quantum mechanics and particle wave theory, said that the total number of minds in the universe is one. That is, it's a singularity. And that's really true. And so experiencing that is not only a very enlightened state for humans, but it becomes an operational paradigm when you're dealing with these sorts of civilizations whose technologies resonate beyond the frequency of the speed of light and matter and linear space-time. And you cannot understand these beings without understanding these fundamental principles that are based in the understanding of consciousness. And I think this is why I was able to take this quite far in terms of understanding who these visitors are, why they're here, how they appear, and how to make contact with them.
Sure.
One of the things we do is that 3 or 4 times a year we have these events for the public where we take people out to areas such as, well, this summer we'll be in Crestone, Colorado, in the desert of Colorado for a week, and around September, Labor Day, we'll be up on Mount Shasta in California, and then we'll be at Joshua Tree Wilderness in the fall in November. And we train people to enter into this state of consciousness and then use the remote viewing techniques and then the CE5 initiative, the vectoring of these spacecraft through consciousness. Mm-hmm. And we have never had one of these expeditions where we haven't had contact happen. And people who have never experienced any of this and who are very nuts and bolts are just astonished by the end of this because they realize that basically this is the Rosetta Stone of ET contact and communication.
Sure. Well, let's talk a little bit about some of the experiences that y'all have had on those gatherings. What happens?
Well, I'll just give you an example. We just got back a few weeks ago from being up in Joshua Tree Wilderness, and we had about 25 or 30 people with us, and we were in this place that we go to up in Joshua Tree National Park, mm-hmm. and we were doing this protocol, and suddenly, right over the group, a beautiful blue-white object appeared, and not far up, maybe 20 feet, 30 feet above us. And the whole group was in this light, a burst of like cosmic light that appeared and was just pouring into the group. Everyone felt this enormous shift in energy that shifted up, very high state of consciousness. and communication with these beings on board this craft. A few moments later, we were in the middle of, I was guiding a meditation. This same object appeared down this path over an area where we had had one of these craft land a few years earlier, and it lit up and was hovering just right, maybe, a few feet above the desert floor. And, of course, people were stunned by this because this was not subtle or something just being seen.
Yeah, that's pretty right in your face.
It was right in your face. The year before when we were there, we had one appear about 15 feet above us and came over. It materialized right outside our circle and hovered about 15 feet above us, making this very unusual resonant sound like a didgeridoo. It was like wah, 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 wah. Came right over and then vanished on the other side of the circle. And then later that evening, we were out in this sandy, flat area, and a spacecraft was there hovering, not quite materialized, but enough that you could see it shimmering out over the field with these beings outside of it communicating with us. And it's a very, people go, my God, is this sort of thing actually happen? I said, yes, of course, because they're very eager. These beings are very eager to find humans who are enlightened enough to approach them peacefully, because what our covert classified military projects have been doing is to try to track these objects and shoot them down. I mean, their whole game is cat and mouse where they're trying to destroy them. So,
is that what Star Wars was really about? I mean, with the satellites and all during the Reagan administration?
Yes, and of course, and I have been, if people go to disclosureproject.org, they'll see that we have testimony from over 100 top-secret military and intelligence witnesses who've dealt with this issue, and a number of them describe our attempts to down and to attack these objects. It's a very dangerous and foolish thing that we're doing, and it's threatening the equilibrium of the world, quite frankly, because...
So why do you think they're coming?
Why?
Yeah.
Well, I think they've been here around for many thousands of years. I seriously doubt it's a recent phenomenon. I think that if you look at this, and in talking to people in British intelligence and the people in the United States military, the real increase in these events happened around the time we started detonating nuclear weapons.
Yeah, I get that.
And at the same time we started going out into space. I mean, I think you have to understand that any civilization that has reached a point of peaceful coexistence, who would see us evolving out of the time of World War II into this post-World War II period where we began to go into space, but at the same time began to develop hydrogen bombs and nuclear weapons, I think this would put a big red flag over this planet. And my understanding is that they're quite concerned about what we're doing to this planet, and that also that we not be turned loose on the universe, where we could be a threat to other planets that are existing peacefully and do not even have the concept of warfare and weapon systems. And so,
because it's not just about this planet, right? I mean, it's about what happens on this planet affects the totality of reality.
Of course, in every thought and conscious action, but when there are mega system events that happen on a planet like this, it certainly affects other worlds, and it affects the equilibrium of the cosmos in general. So there's a serious reason for their being here. I think, number one, they're observing what we're doing and watching us make this big transition from a fractured sort of warring world to a peaceful civilization, and we are going to make that transition. It may not all be smooth, but we'll make it. And I think, meanwhile, they're wanting to be sure that we don't become a threat elsewhere, and I think they're also wanting to start to open up contact with people who are peaceful and enlightened enough to understand how to make contact and why they should be making contact. Sure. One of the things I point out to people is that a lot of folks will say, well, what if some of them are hostile? I said, well, the only ones that are hostile are the ones that are being manufactured by humans. And the big mythology in the New Age world is that there are the good ones and the bad ones, and in reality, most of that is disinformation created by the intelligence community to scare people, because eventually they would like to have us put all these weapons in space and spend trillions of dollars on Star Wars type stuff. And this is exactly we've already done it. I mean, but I mean, I have folks who worked on these in the 1960s, where we already had weapon systems that were based in space that were targeting these extraterrestrial vehicles. So this has been going on for 40 years.
There's not just one race that's visiting us, though, right? I mean, do you get that?
Oh, there are dozens.
Yeah.
And none of them are hostile, and
No.
none of them are harmful. And some of them are quite worried about our hostility and have done things to try to contain us. And I think that containment, like a quarantine type of exercise, has enraged some in our classified military projects, and they don't understand why these beings would not want us, for example, to be traveling with our experimental anti-gravity vehicles, which we have, all the way out to Mars or all the way out to some of the other planets. And the reason they don't want us out there is because we're not going out there with the right intention. So the core to making contact with these beings and the key to humans as a species being welcome in space is establishing universal peace. World peace won't cut it.
Yeah.
It's not going to be enough just that we have peace on Earth. We also have to have universal peace, which is what we're telling people, is that it has to evolve into an understanding that peace has to occur not just on Earth, but our whole attitude towards the cosmos has to become peaceful, or we're not going to be allowed to fulfill our potential to become ourselves interstellar beings.
Boy, Stephen, we have a lot in common. This is awesome. Well, you know what I find fascinating is that there are so many instances where the military has fired on the ships. I mean, even going down to Mexico and interfering with things that were going on down there, our government. And I don't know of any instance where any of the ships have fired back or done anything destructive.
No, it has never happened. And, you know, if you go to a UFO conference, quote unquote, you'll find that 90 to 95% of everything being shared there is some type of concocted disinformation designed to scare the bejeebies out of people.
Yeah.
Because, you know, just like 9/11, the way that you control the masses is through fear, which is the opposite of love and the opposite of peace. And I think that this psychological warfare technique has been used for, since the beginning of time, for demagogues to control the masses. And yet, when our team has gone out all over the world, I mean, you have to understand, we have had an advanced diplomatic team that has gone all over the world to areas where these ET beings are being seen. We've made contact. We've had nothing but the most beautiful and peaceful encounters. You know, all these stories of mutilation and abductions and torture and sexual rape and all this negative, horrible stuff, that's all disinformation or counterintelligence activities. Now, there are people in the classified programs that are human that stage those events for their psychological warfare purposes. I have a document from 1953 where the CIA stated that one of the key values of the UFO issue would be in their psychological warfare value. And it's a very interesting document. And I have another document, and people need to get this book called Disclosure, that have all these government documents that we have acquired and the testimony of all these military and intelligence witnesses, because they describe clearly what is really going on behind the scenes and why the media is deceived and why the public is deceived on this issue. And one of the deceptions is to try to present this idea that there's some kind of hostile threat from outer space, because they're trying to lay the foundation for future war in space. And this is what we have to resist. We have to resist this siren song of greed coming from the military-industrial complex and the sort of orthodox eschatologists, the people who would like to figure out how to precipitate an end of the world scenario, like these books Left Behind and all this sort of fundamentalism. Those are the guys running this program.
Yeah.
These classified programs are filled with really kooky people from the lunatic fringe of the religious extremists. And so people have to understand that this is the opposite of where our civilization is really headed, and these are the dying gasps of a dying world order.
There was something that I read in your book that kind of stunned me, and although it didn't surprise me, it was just, and that is that there are certain abduction programs that are being funded by people on the Earth.
Oh, yeah. Well, these are, if it's an abduction, it's human. If it's contact, it's ET. I tell people this is all linguistic, perhaps, but there are lots of people who've had ET contact, and there are lots of people who've been victims of these abductions, which are run by humans. For example, I have personally interviewed several military men, one of whom was an Army Ranger, who worked on special projects that were compartmented, where they were using what are called alien reproduction vehicles. And these are things that look like a flying saucer or UFO that's made by Lockheed and Northrop. And they had either costumes on or use what are called PLFs, program life forms, that look like extraterrestrial beings, but they're not. They're completely man-made, to abduct or frighten people so that there would begin to be this subculture awareness of fear, and so that they can eventually ramp that up in sort of a cosmic Gulf of Tonkin scenario to stampede military and political leaders and the masses into accepting the cost of building weapons in space and getting into an interplanetary war. It's a matter of public record that General Douglas MacArthur in his last speech to Congress stated that, quote, World War III will be interplanetary war. So this has been in the planning stages since at least the 60s and perhaps the 50s. And so much of the imaging and so much of the subculture awareness on this is being driven by a virulent, well-funded, and high-tech human technological disinformation campaign that's designed to scare people. And what I tell people is that you've got to be able to look through this, it's like the movie The Matrix, this sort of matrix of deception and nonsense, and see what's really true. Because people, unfortunately, because of our sort of primitive brains, have this flight or fight response and tend to believe a threat because we're trained in our tribal roots to be paranoid of the unknown.
Right.
It's the roots of racism. It's the roots of hatred. And I think that this is something we have to resist, because there are people who are deliberately throwing fuel on that fire in a very deceptive way. And what I've tried to explain in this new book is that I have gone into meetings with folks who are in charge of those deceptive programs and have actually acquired documents from institutes that are planning this, quote, I'm using the term used in this top secret document, stagecraft, to simulate these sort of frightening experiences. So I tell people, don't be afraid of the extraterrestrial visitors, but you should be very concerned about these other agendas, and we have to be the counterbalance to that. See, we're the children of Earth, and we alone can transform this planet and prepare it for a time of universal peace.
But people that are contactees do go onto the ships, and sometimes I know do get certain markings on their bodies or other things. And when I read that, where I went was into confusion about, okay, what's what? That's kind of where it took me. You know, okay, if you're a contactee, you pretty well know you are for the most part. But then you get in, then, you know, you start finding that you have marks on your body or different things, which I've talked about on the show before. It's a subject that I'm very interested in. And I was just a little confused about the difference there and what you were talking about.
Well, I think there are people who have had actual contact with ETs that then have one of these paramilitary groups engage them in a pseudo contact event that's an abduction, and so that's deliberately confusing. Okay. And I think that you have to take every case on its own merits. I know when they have tried to target people in my group with that kind of experience, because we have this information, we have documents and insider whistleblower testimony about the technologies they're using to do this. We're able to discern between the false contact disinformation events, abductions, and the real contact events. But, you know, this is where knowledge really is power. Without the knowledge that there's the real thing versus this Memorex pseudo thing, you're not going to be able to distinguish it. And unfortunately, I think many people can't imagine that the human capabilities have evolved to where they have. And I point out to people that many of the capabilities that I'm describing existed by the 1950s. We're unlimited in scope of consciousness and what we're able to do with it. No, I'm talking about classified projects that have have weapon systems and things that look like UFOs that aren't. And but then there's so many people that have abduction type descriptions and yet no real memories. They think it was a dream, or they wake up with marks and they don't know where they're coming from. And that's why I got confused about what you were talking about. I just wanted to clarify it for me as much as everybody else. Well, you have to take each case on its merits, and you're not going to know is it real or is it Memorex without doing a very careful investigation. The problem is that if you go to people who deal with this issue, they don't know that there's a parallel human deception program that's extremely high-tech, and they're going to confuse the real contact with the false stuff. Why? Because they don't know the false is even possible. And I remember talking to someone who did research on this once, and when I started talking about the EG&G, which is a big high-tech electronics company that was making the implants, the involvement of E-Systems and Raytheon, the fact that Northrop and SAIC and Lockheed were building things that look absolutely like an ET craft, but they're man-made, the whole concept of stagecraft. They didn't know this whole body of evidence. And I'm going, well, you better learn about it because you're not going to be able to discern. It's like a doctor not knowing the difference between chest pain from a heart attack and chest pain from a pneumonia that's eaten into the lining of the lungs or something. So, you've got to have a differential diagnosis, and knowledge is the greatest purifier, it says in the Bhagavad Gita, and that's very, very true. Unfortunately, most of what is out there that passes for information on this subject, which is consumed in books and videos and TV shows and what have you, is deliberate false information or disinformation designed for a certain psychological conditioning response, primarily to condition people to be afraid. And what I've said to people is, well, let's put all that aside and let's actually go out to these places and make contact with a group of people who understand the technology of contact. And we go out not only with these consciousness technologies we're using, but also with laser systems and electromagnetic sounds that we send up and all these things. And we, and see what happens and let's see if there's anything to be afraid of. And there's not. I mean, the only time we've ever had anything remotely frightening is when we've been, chased by police or had, military helicopter or aircraft come down and put searchlights on us and things like this. But nothing from the ETs has been at all worrisome. It's all been humans. So I tell people that a lot of, in a sense, this is sort of a cosmic Rorschach test. It's a sort of a cosmic mirror. The way people view this is a reflection of their own inner state of knowledge and consciousness.
Sure. I haven't heard of anything that feels like truth that wasn't of peace and of universal concern and concern for what's going on with our earth and what we're going to, what our future looks like and how we can change it. Another thing you said was that it was about how come we're in such a spiritual thing right now, that's really the way that consciousness is the way that you said is the safest path toward establishing world and universal peace. And, that's an amazing thing that I think so many people are awakening right now to that, not really realizing what's going on, but so many conscious awarenesses are coming back to reality, with people, and we have the ability to change everything.
Well, everything emerges first in this consciousness and thought that we have.
Right.
And people think this is a mysterious thing to say, but I said, let's just back it up to something very practical. You want to build a house. Well, you first have to visualize it. You have to have the thought and the intention to do it. You have to plan it out. Everything that's created on Earth that humans do starts from within, whether it's good or bad. And so if we wish to manifest a world that is in universal state of peace, that's using, by the way, technologies that do not damage the Earth, that get energy from the fabric of space-time around us, and that's how these ET craft are functioning and going through interstellar space. They're not using oil or solid rocket boosters or any of these primitive things. We can make that world. And so one of the beautiful things, I made a meditation CD that people can get at disclosureproject.org, where, along with this new book that describes this vision, going into this state of consciousness where you then can see the future of the world, the next 500,000 years of Earth's evolution on this very positive trajectory of universal peace, but also on a very practical level where how are we going to be living on the Earth in a way that isn't violent to Gaia, to the Earth being herself? Well, the good news is that those technologies and sciences are already fully elucidated, albeit they've been classified and stolen from the masses, which is one of the things our group is working very actively to correct. And if this technology is applied for peaceful purposes, we would never have to use any of the Earth's resources for energy, for transportation, for communication, etc. And, humans could be living in peace with Earth herself without this current situation where we're cannibalizing her atmosphere and using up her resources. And this is not a utopia. These are technologies which we can prove already exist. And the good news is that everything that humanity needs to be on this planet for thousands of years of peace into the future and a high-tech, peaceful civilization is here today. It's already here.
Yeah. Do the ETs ever communicate to you technologies and show you how they're working within the universal construct and that they're not damaging anything but using it in and of the one?
Yes, we have seen how that works, and of course I'm not a mechanical or electrical engineer, and these are electronic systems, but I have people working on that, and we do know that this is one of the projects that we have. We have an energy research project that we're looking to have people support so that we can put a lab together where we recreate these anti-gravity and free energy type generation systems so that they can get out to the masses. They do exist in some very small labs, and they've been kept under wraps. What my objective is that this is the time where all these secret and wondrous technologies need to be unveiled.
Oh, there's so many of them.
And they've existed for most of the 20th century. You just have a cabal of what I call petro-Nazis and fascists who've kept all this stuff secret. But it doesn't mean that that's the state of the knowledge. The state of the knowledge of what's there and which has already been built. This is not just the theoretical physics. These are physical systems already built. It's very advanced, and it's beautiful because you can imagine a world where there would be no shortage. There would be abundance. There would be no pollution. There would be 100% recycling because the energy would be free to do the recycling. There would be no use of fossil fuels or coal, etc. And there would be these anti-gravity lift systems to go between cities silently and without the use of jet fuel that is destroying the upper atmosphere.
Well, if you wanted to go from there with the anti-gravity lift, then you could also construct anything you wanted using weightlessness.
Well, of course, how do you think the Great Pyramids were built?
Of course.
And so, what I point out, and these huge obelisks, that even now we can't figure out how they were cut and erected. So my point to people is that we are at this cusp where one whole world is sort of one whole cycle of human and Earth evolution is closing, and it's a 400 and some thousand year cycle, and there's a 500,000 year cycle opening, literally 5,000 centuries, and we're all living at this time of great change, and some would say turmoil, but what I see it is that it's a time of great transition, and you simply have to get your vision adjusted so you see what is emerging and then become part of that coherent field to manifest that world and not get sucked into down the toilet with all this rubbish that's going down the toilet, which is, if you understand the three Gunas that it talks about in the Vedas, and there's the sattva, which is the purity and the creative force, and then there's tamas, which destroys, and there's rajas, which maintains sort of equilibrium between the two. Well, we need to be on the rajas and sattva force of this, manifesting the good future, rather than being sucked into what's being replaced, because there is an entire cycle closing, and you can either be closed up with that cycle, or you can be born into this beautiful new vision.
Exactly. It's not some made-up thing that everybody's talking about. We really are shifting.
Oh, it is. It's huge, the changes, and they're going to get even more pronounced over the next 5 or 10 years.
We talk about that a lot on this show. Well, what do you find to be the most fulfilling part of making contact? You're in some ways you're viewed as very controversial. I think you're awesome. I'm glad you're out there, and I'm happy anytime anybody is looking for the truth, because that's what it's about. But for you personally, what's the most fulfilling part of all of this?
The most fulfilling part of it is sharing with people when we go on these expeditions that people can find out about at CSETI.org, where we all go into this state of cosmic consciousness and then remote view these craft and really manifest through this meditative and prayer process this peaceful future of the Earth, and then you see these ET craft appear. They are so eager to join with humans in this work of creating the good future for Earth. And to me, that's the most fulfilling thing to see happening. And it's not just happening with a small group, that we're doing this with thousands of people all over the world, and you wouldn't believe the sort of experiences and contact that's happening. The other thing that I think is very exciting is that this whole reality is beginning to be taken very positively and very seriously by people in high places in various governments. We have the former head of the Ministry of Defense for Canada, who's now working with us, the Honorable Paul Hellyer, who has come out publicly calling for disclosure and for this information coming out and these technologies coming out for the peaceful use on Earth and the elimination of global warming and pollution.
I actually believe I saw that speech. It was phenomenal.
Yeah, he and I are working very closely together. You can actually see that on our website, disclosureproject.org. And we're also working with some other governments around the world who want to work with us openly in making peaceful diplomatic contact.
Yeah,
and we're talking the leadership of these governments.
Well,
so
thank God.
Yes, this is a big change that's happening. And so what we see happening is that this message and this information is really getting out there. You know, a couple years ago I wrote an article for the World Affairs Journal, which is published out of India and is sort of the counterpart to the Foreign Affairs Journal from the Council on Foreign Relations here. It's an independent journal called the World Affairs Journal, and they have been very supportive of disclosure and of contact and of this information getting out. And this is a journal read by most of the world's prime ministers and foreign ministers. And I find that there are a lot of people around the world realizing that not only are we being visited by these beings from elsewhere, but it's time for us to do something constructive and positive so that there's not this vacuum of secrecy and inaction into which militarists will step and make a mess of it. And I think this is something that people are beginning to awaken to in the last few months very rapidly. And part of that is because we have been able to get and put together the largest body of dispositive proof and evidence on this subject ever assembled. At disclosureproject.org, I mean, people can see people in the military who are named with the top secret clearances, who are lieutenant colonels and brigadier generals, and coming forward talking about the fact that we've had contact and that they have tracked these things on radar and et cetera and so on. It's an amazing body of evidence, and so it's undeniable to anyone who looks at it, because it's not just one person giving their anecdotal story. It's hundreds of these people coming forward. So what I have done is to provide the leadership to put all those elements together and put them out to the public in a form that anyone can understand. And I think that evidence and proof then leads people to say, well, if we're being visited, what should we do about this? And what are the technologies behind these spacecraft? Yeah. And so once those things start getting asked, we find that the answers are already there.
Yeah, they've got a lot to say.
Yeah, and so the answer to what do we do is that we do the CE5 initiative, which is this very peaceful universal contact program. And now we have a major world power, a government, not in the United States, but one other world power, openly wanting to make contact peacefully with these ETs with us. We have some people working with us on the technologies to get these technologies out, and we're looking for a lot of people to join us on that, because it isn't going to be very helpful if we can sit and be in prayer and meditation, but we destroy the biosphere that we're living in. We have got to heal the Earth, and it can't be healed until we quit abusing her immune system and her air and her water. And the technologies to do that exist, but we have got to pull together and bring these systems out, even though there's enormous resistance from the oil lobby and the financial interests around the world who want to keep us addicted to oil and coal and fossil fuels. We need to say, look, that era is over.
Done.
Let's start a new chapter.
I'm with you. Well, you let me know where that's going to be. I'll show up.
Yeah, well, that's coming we hope, quickly, but we're looking for people to help us. So people listening who think they can help us with that, they should be with us in that effort.
I think it's a phenomenal thing. Well, let me ask you about something else. There's a lot of talk about hybrids, about human ET interbreeding and all of that. And do you have any evidence that that's truth? I mean, I feel like it's very real, and I don't think it's a bad thing. just curious what you know about that.
I have never seen anything that supports that there's that kind of literal See, I think there's a lot happening that's on a level in consciousness that people, and on the astral that people assume is physical, and I don't think it's physical. Now, eventually it manifests in the physical.
Right.
And so I think we're evolving into a universal form of being. But it's not what people think. In other words,
interesting perspective.
Okay, yeah, it's not what people think. And I'm saying this as a medical doctor and a core medical doctor. I mean, I'm not a psychiatrist. I did trauma and emergency medicine.
Sure.
And so what I think is that there is a coming together of universal people, but it's happening on a deeper level than what people are assuming is taking place on a purely physical, genetic level. And I think that in reality, our physical bodies are first manifested in that state of the conscious body, the causal body, the tone, the sound, like a mantra. Each person has their own tone or sound that's emanating from consciousness. And then there's this body of light or astral body, and that manifests the physical body. And so you have to turn this whole paradigm around. And once you understand that that's what's happening, a lot of stuff begins to make sense.
I love that. I hadn't thought about it from that direction.
Yeah, it's from inside out.
Oh yeah, that I got. It was the happening on the other levels, and it's just a reversal of what we're used to looking at.
Right.
That's cool. I'm going to have to sit with that one.
It's an interesting thing to contemplate. One thing that happened, and this is really going out on a limb, but I'll share it with your listeners. We had a contact event that took place here at our farm in Virginia, right near Monticello, where Thomas Jefferson's home is. And we had this ET craft that wasn't quite materialized, but that was shimmering in our meadow with these beings outside. And I had a little round quartz rock that was perfectly round, about the size of a golf ball, in my hand. And I offered it to this ET that came up. And my hand changed, and everyone in our group saw this, changed from a 5-fingered human hand, and it just changed and became a elongated 3-fingered ET hand, and they merged into one. And everyone saw this, and we were awake, physical. It was amazing. So what was that? Things are not what they appear to be. Yeah,
I get that.
Yeah.
So it was just an overlapping of the realities of them and us.
Or
you and them.
Emerging into oneness. Yeah.
Right. That's what I mean. It's all the same.
But it ultimately manifested that my hand altered its appearance. And everyone saw this. This wasn't something mystical that I saw. Everyone standing around looking at this saw that happen. It was like, oh, my God. And so when you begin to understand the siddhis, Siddhis, that are talked about in the Vedas, the fact that you can levitate, that you can dematerialize a body and rematerialize elsewhere, well, you begin to realize that advanced extraterrestrial civilizations that are going faster than the speed of light through interstellar distances, well, they're not speeding up in a linear way. They're shifting into these other energy forms that are etheric and astral, and then re-emerging into physical, materialized space-time. And I go through this in this new book, Hidden Truth, Forbidden Knowledge, which is people can order it at disclosureproject.org. And that book describes, and the meditation CD that goes with it describes that process of how you manifest from this state of pure consciousness. And if you understand that, then the sort of mysterious and enigmatic things that happen around these ET craft begin to make a lot of sense.
Total sense.
Yep.
I mean, they're really, what we look at as something that is so foreign to our reality is so much who we are in our true reality.
Right, correct. And the other thing to remember is that often these ET craft will not even be visible with the naked eye, but they will be there phased in an energy field that the human eye can't see. I'll give you an example. We were here doing one of these expeditions with about 30 people at our home here in Virginia last October, and we were sitting in a circle doing this meditation, and I pointed up because I sensed that there was an ET craft right above us and a little bit to the north, and there was this ET probe that came down out of the sky right at the edge of what would be visible. I don't think most people saw it, and came into the center of the circle and then stood there shimmering. Well, there was someone who, now, with the naked eye, you really couldn't see this. Someone was filming at that point with a super night shot Sony camera that had the infrared.
Oh, and it showed up.
And it showed this object coming in and being right in the center of the group, and it's clear as a bell. We're going to have it up on our website soon. And this was a consciousness electronic probe that was a communication device that was from the ET standing right in the center of the circle, and we filmed it. But it wasn't visible with the naked eye. Now, the other thing that just happened, we were at Mount Shasta this past fall, and we had this amazing series of contacts, and this one woman had just a very simple digital camera, and the new ones have good CCDs or light cells in them, and she sensed that this ET craft was very nearby. And we'd been doing this contact right in that area for several days, and she took a picture just where she felt it, even though she couldn't see anything with the naked eye. And the digital camera got this beautiful ET craft right there at treetop level, or below the top of the tree, that was hovering there. And this is an amazing photograph. And yet, with the naked eye, she didn't see a thing, but it was absolutely there. So what you often find is that, you're not dealing with things that have to behave the way a 747 does, or even one of these alien reproduction vehicle things that are made at the Lockheed. We're dealing with very, very advanced technologies. And one of the things you have to understand is that these spacecraft are so evolved that they are conscious nanobio machines.
Yep.
What I'm saying is that they are living and they are conscious even though they're spacecraft.
I've seen them, and it's amazing. And they and they're just like being with you.
Correct.
The feeling of them is just stunning.
Yeah, they are living and conscious, and
the
then
wholeness
beings
of it,
on board are plugged in, as it were, within this field of consciousness and thought and bioelectric field that is their physical bodies as well. So you're dealing with, it's not your granddad's Oldsmobile.
Nope.
It is amazingly beautiful technology.
I have a great story for you on those lines. I was actually on my way to Sedona to teach in a conference a couple years ago, and a young mom and her son picked me up at the airport to take me out there, and they picked me up in Phoenix, so it was a bit of a ride back. And the little guy wouldn't talk to me because they introduced me as Dr. Meg, and he thought I was a doctor that with needles and like you.
Right.
And so he started talking. Finally, his mom said, "Well, tell Dr. Meg about your dreams." And he started talking to me about it. And it's so classic being on the ship, And we're driving along, and all of a sudden, now he's 6. All of a sudden, he says, "Hey, they're out there. Do you see them?" And his mom looks like, "No, you can't. No, there's nothing out there." And he says to his mom, "You're not looking fast enough."
Right. He's right.
I know.
Yeah, so this is exactly how all of these things happen. And I'm just describing a few of the recent things that have happened just in the last 6 months on these expeditions. And it's a wonderful thing for people to experience. And more people are understanding this. Back in the 90s when President Clinton was in office, his team were looking into this, and we're trying to figure out why this was being kept secret and who was keeping it secret. And the president, I put together a very big briefing document for him, and ultimately began to brief senior officials in his administration. And I was invited to a meeting to brief his first CIA director, R. James Woolsey. And during the course of this, first of all, he was shaken to his foundations because he knew this was real, and yet he knew that these rogue programs were lying to him and to the president and were denying him access. So that's why I was called in, to be honest with you. Now, what's interesting about that is that as we went through all this information, he was very shaken by the fact that there was this rogue and criminal element that had hijacked this information from the leadership that was the legal leadership of the country. I said, yes, but this has been going on since Eisenhower talked about beware the military-industrial complex. There's nothing new here. But then his wife at some point, who was the chief operating officer, was her title of the National Academy of Sciences, the most prestigious scientific institute. And she turned to me and she said, well, Dr. Greer, I want to know how they could communicate through interstellar distances. And I said, well, I had to do a gut check. Do I tell her something that sounds kind of scientific but isn't true, or do I tell her the truth and risk losing my credibility to these very, sort of left-wing scientific policy people? And I said, no, I'm going to tell her the truth. And so I began to describe the fact that the speed of light is too slow to go through interstellar space. It would, you'd be dead by the time you could get a message from one point of space to another at the speed of light. And I began to talk about the fact that these are technologies that resonate and shift beyond the frequency of light into this field of clearly coherent thought, and that they have electronics on these spacecraft that interface directly with clear and coherent thought. She looked at me and she said, well, I thought it had to be something like that. Now, this is the wife of the CIA director and, a PhD scientist, head of the National Academy of Sciences. So I'm thinking, you know what? People are ready to know the truth.
Oh, they are so ready. And I want to be standing there when the first ship shows up and everybody gets to see it.
Yeah, well, that's in the works.
I know. I want to be there.
Oh, yeah.
Well, we're running out of hour. This is fascinating, and I could talk to you for days. We have so much in common, and I'm so glad you're doing this work. But I think my last question would be this: what is it that you would say to people that people maybe haven't asked you, or something that you would really like to say to get a point out or a thought out or an intention out? What would you want to? We're reaching 87 countries right now.
Right.
What would you say?
Well, I would say that people need to understand that all this is very real, and they need to go to disclosureproject.org and CSETI.org and learn about this. And we need people to join with us in meditation and prayer for universal peace and for our guidance and protection. And we need people to begin to gather together to take action. For example, there's a 2-hour video of these military people exposing the secrets that people can air on their cable access channels. There are a lot of projects that people need to understand that we're at a time where people need to take action. It's not enough to sit in a cave and meditate. You have to do that and be a man in the world or a woman in the world making this change happen, because these visitors aren't going to make that change for us. They're here to help and to understand. We are the children of Earth, and we have to be the prime movers to make this change happen on Earth.
Yeah, those days of saying they'll fix it is over. There isn't any they. We are that.
That's exactly right. And we have to avoid this sort of cosmic codependency where we either tend to want someone to swoop in and fix it or blame someone else. We have to say we are responsible for the state of the world, and we need to manifest this good future. And it's completely achievable if people learn about it and work together.
Yeah, and don't just get into that space on the weekends or every other Wednesday night or something. Be that.
Right.
Stephen Greer, it's been an honor and a pleasure, and I appreciate you being on the show.
Well, thank you.
I do hope you'll come back, and maybe we could shake a few things up over time.
Yeah, that's what our job is. That's why we're here.
That's right, and to do it with love. So thank you so much, and we'll see about getting you back on, because I know that everybody's saying, I want more.
Okay, well, thank you.
And good luck with everything. Thanks for being on.
Bye-bye.
Take care. And to each of you out there, I'm wishing you laughter in your days, joy in your hearts, and love in everything you do. Have a beautiful night.